Hello, my ducklings, and welcome to De Arte Legendi cum Avibus, or The Art of Reading with Birds, study skills for fledglings and mature falcons alike. My name is Austin, and I've created this presentation to share with you some study methods that you can use as we tackle our club curriculum. I'm going to begin by introducing myself so you know the extent and limitations of my credentials. Next, I'll give you a little overview of how our memories work, or sometimes don't work. Having a little theory behind what we're doing will let you evaluate other methods you might come across and help you apply them more broadly. Thus informed, I'll show you how to tackle dense information so that you can understand and remember it better. Then we'll move on to a couple of note-taking techniques and conclude with how you can make the most of this by working with a partner. So let us proceed. First, a bit about me. My day job is teaching university Italian, and my background is in foreign language education. As part of my master's, I took an interest in reading education and chose to focus on it for my internship, where I worked in an ESL reading class. I then did a couple tours of duty teaching in an all-ages reading and study skills program, and now that I mostly teach Italian classes, I coach my students in study strategies, and especially reading strategies as a vehicle for overall skill acquisition. So, I'm not a specialized reading teacher, but really a learning teacher. And if you will indulge me, I always teach at least one Italian word on syllabus day. So, just for fun, we will learn the word for lawyer, which is avvocato. Avvocato comes straight from the Latin ad voce, literally someone who speaks on someone's behalf, as in vocal. But it's easier and more fun to remember it by imagining a shriveled little avocado with glasses and a briefcase saying, "I object." So, avvocato, lawyer. That is our word for the day, just for fun. With our vocabulary quota satisfied, let's look at our brains. The primary process I want to draw your attention to is working memory. This isn't a location in the brain, but rather the way our brain takes in sensory information and either discards it or processes it for later retrieval. It's kind of like a news ticker going across a screen, with information passing by in a continuous flow. The words I'm saying, the rattle of the air conditioner, the dust motes in the window, everything that you're taking in with your senses is passing through your working memory. Now, the capacity of our working memory is very limited. It can only hold 5 to 7 pieces of information at any time. And as new information streams in, anything that doesn't get plucked from that conveyor belt and processed for longer storage is gone. It's in one ear and out the other. I'll give you an example. Say you are driving to the falconry conference. Along the way, you observe the cars around you, hopefully, and successfully navigate around them to get to your destination safely, hopefully. But if I asked you how many red cars you passed on your way, you probably wouldn't be able to tell me, even though you saw each one. You didn't retain that information because it was only needed in the moment and was pushed away as new information flowed in. Now, if I had asked you before you left to remember how many red cars you passed on your way, you would know to count them and make a mental note of the number, let's say 16. And that's easy to remember, since that's the age you were when you got your driver's license. 16. When you parked at the falconry conference, you remembered where you parked by repeating to yourself, Peregrine level 3, Peregrine level 3, Peregrine level 3. All of these are examples of methods you already use intuitively, and so now we can look at how to apply them to more complex ideas systematically. I want to note here that I'll be using text as an example, but you can apply this to studying through any medium. Whether you're learning on paper, on a screen, or listening to a lecture or a reading, the approach will be much the same. The method I was taught in grad school is called SQ3R: survey, question, read, recite, repeat. There are tons of methods out there, and they're all pretty good, because they're all ways of breaking down how our brains process information into deliberate steps. So if you're familiar with other methods that do this, that's great. None is really better than the other. There are many like it, but this one is mine. It begins with survey. Get a feel for what you'll be learning to get the context and bring in background knowledge. Next, question. Focus your approach so you know what you want to get out of a text or a lecture. Finally, you're ready to read or listen. Then, recite. Test your comprehension and process the information by putting it in your own words. And lastly, repeat. Read and recite more than once. Take notes to reinforce the points you've summarized and talk about the ideas with others. Let's look at each of these steps in more detail. Starting with survey. Surveying is probably the most neglected step, but it's crucial. The more background knowledge you have in a topic, the higher your comprehension will be. Surveying your text first gives you the lay of the land and will activate what background knowledge you have on a topic, or alert you to what you might need to look up in order to prepare. Start by reading the title, the blurb, the chapter or the subject headings, and any bold text in an article, as well as any publishing information. What is the text about? Who wrote it? Was that person a journalist, a historian, a layperson? What year was it written, and where was it published? How is the author organizing the information? Get as much context as you can. And if you're really unfamiliar, you may want to go read the introduction for this step to clue you into where you're going. Remember that everything you know about a text is information you bring into it. And the more you bring in, the better your ability to interpret it. If you're very unfamiliar with a topic, you may want to read a Wikipedia article about the broader context before you go in. Surveying a text can also alert you to vocabulary you might need to look up before you read in order to make sense of the ideas. And you can also start to make a plan of attack, dividing the text into sections that you intend to read in each study session. Surveying is an excellent activity to do with your study partner. What do each of you know about the subject? Are either of you familiar with the author's work? Share your background knowledge and decide on a reading schedule together. Once you've built up that context together, you can then narrow your focus with the next step. Question. This is another great step to do with your partner. What do you want to learn from this text? What are you curious about? You can have as many questions as you like, but knowing what you want to get out of a text before you begin will help focus your attention. Know that you're going to count the red cars. With all that in place, you're finally ready to read or listen. Our brains do process information somewhat differently if we're listening or reading, or even if we're reading off paper versus a screen. The latter's movement tends to train our eyes to skim. None of this is a bad thing, and for our purposes, just choose which medium you're comfortable with. The important thing is to read or listen in manageable chunks. This may be a chapter, it may be a paragraph. The denser the information, the smaller the chunks you want to tackle at a time. You'll be deciphering the text as you go, piece by piece. Once you've read a chunk, you're ready to recite. Here is where we will begin to process what we just read to understand and remember it better. The lovely thing about reading is that the process going on inside our brains is outstandingly complex, but the meta process for really getting it is dead simple. After each chunk, or after you encounter a main idea, set your text aside, or pause it if you're listening, and recite out loud, in your own words, what you just read. Make a summary of what you just read or listened to in your own words. Your recitation can be long or short, but the important thing is that you're doing it out loud, in your own words, without referencing the text. You can get a straight summary, but you can also compare it to something you already know, draw a connection to something else you've learned, or make note of any questions that arise. You don't need to remember anything word for word. Just explain what you read the way you would tell a friend about a movie you just saw. This does two things. First, it will boost comprehension as you forge new neural pathways. Articulating your understanding of something also shows you where you have gaps in your knowledge. I'm sure, like me, you've had the experience of attempting to define a word you've read 1,000 times and understood in context, only to realize you don't actually know precisely what it means. This is good. Make a note of these gaps and either revisit the passage you just read or look it up elsewhere. Second, this is the fastest and easiest way to process this information for later retrieval. Just as you made a note of how many red cars you saw and where you parked, you will articulate the ideas you encounter to help cement them in your mind. The wonderful thing is that while recitation with a partner is great, you take turns teaching one another what you just read, you're actually teaching it to yourself. So teach the wall, teach your cat, teach whoever or whatever will hold still what you just learned. One of my fourth graders said she would teach her stuffed animals. Isn't that the sweetest thing you ever heard? So once you've done your recitation, it's time to repeat. Possibly the second most neglected step after survey. Repeat well and repeat often. If you were fuzzy on the passage you just read, read it again with your new understanding, then recite once more. You can also repeat by condensing your recitation into your notes. More on that later. And also by discussing what you learned with your partner. Revisit these ideas often, talk about them with others, and review your notes more than once. After each study session, in which you will have read and recited several chunks, do a final recap of everything you read. Make a note of anything you're curious about, what you agree or disagree with, or anything that's unclear. Write down any new words you learned or rabbit holes you want to go down. You will also want to do a recitation before your next reading session. Before you open the book to continue, do a recap of everything you read in the previous session and revisit anything that is still fuzzy. Just as when you were remembering where you parked the car at the Falcon convention, you can never repeat too much or in too many ways. In fact, let's repeat right now. Pause the video and summarize out loud each of the following steps. All right. Turnabout is fair play, so now I'll do my own recitation. Starting with survey, scan the terrain and get as much context and background as possible to bring into the text. Question, narrow your focus and decide what you want to get out of the text. Read, approach the text in manageable chunks, either section by section or pausing after each main idea to digest it by recitation. Explain out loud, and you can whisper, it's fine, in your own words what you just learned without referencing the text. And finally, repeat, 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 repeat. All right. Using these steps will help you navigate heavy texts, make more sense of them, and help you remember information better. But we can enhance that even further by taking notes as we read. And so now I'll show you a couple of methods for doing so. One for taking notes as a separate document, and one for taking notes directly in or on a text. First, when taking notes separately, it doesn't matter if you like to type your notes or write longhand. Do what you prefer. Like SQ3R, there are many, many methods of note-taking out there, so if you already have one you like, go for it. For people who don't have a system, this method will help you avoid that thing where you start out with a shiny new textbook and a shiny new notebook on the first day of school. You open the first page and immediately start writing everything that seems important as you encounter it, often copying out entire quotes in your best handwriting for about 1 3/4 pages until things become more and more ragged and your wrist hurts, and eventually you burn out and say, fuck this, I'm going to go get some ice cream. Or you dive into a textbook with a highlighter, marking what seems important as you go, only to realize that most of the first page is pink, except for words like and or the. This method will help you avoid that, and it really is just a distillation of SQ3R. The trick is you don't know what's important about a passage until you've already read it once. So here's what you do. Start by survey. Write out the headings for your notes. You can transfer those headings verbatim or write your own. Titles, headings of subsections, chapters, whatever. Then question. Write your question at the top of the page, question or questions. And then read, recite, repeat. Here's the important part. Take your notes after you've done these steps. Write down the main points of your recitation, along with any connections you made to other information or texts, any questions you might have, and count how many red cars you saw. You can also draw or diagram ideas if you like. This should make note-taking much easier, as you're not having to write out a dense thicket of sentences, but can summarize what you've already condensed. The act of writing itself is a powerful act of processing from working memory into long-term memory, even if you don't revisit what you wrote. But reviewing your notes periodically, especially with your partner, will make the most of them. For those of you who prefer to write in the margins or mark up texts, you'll be doing much the same thing, but without adding headings. I used to be rather intimidated by people who did this because I always thought that you had to have some sort of profound insight to add to the margins. But really, it's just the same system as above for those who don't like to toggle between their book and their notes, or for those whose notes are very brief or whose handwriting is very, very small. You can certainly highlight or underline important words or passages, but keep in mind that while it will help you find them again if you're referencing a book, by itself, it does very little to process it into long-term memory. Overall, use the margins to write 1 or 2 words that summarize the main points and include any questions, insights, or references to any other work that come up. To conclude, let's talk a little bit about how to do all of this with a partner. We've already seen how surveying, questioning, and reciting with a partner can be helpful. But you can also fill the gaps in one another's knowledge, talk about how the subject connects to other things you know or have experienced. And if you find there's a lot of background knowledge to fill in, you can divide that research equally and then report back to each other, reciting what you have found out to teach it to yourselves and each other. But the most important thing is to talk about what you've learned together freely along any lines of inquiry or interest that have popped up in your journey. And so, my sweet little ducklings, thank you so much for watching my presentation. I really hope it was helpful. But before we go, I have a little pop quiz for you. First, how do you say lawyer in Italian? Next, how many red cars did you pass on your way to the Falcon convention? And finally, where did you park the car? See, I told you so. You can do it. So please let me know if you have any questions or need any help with these topics, and I'll be delighted to do what I can. I always tell my college ducklings that once you're my student, you're always my student. So you can always come to me for help or to clarify any of this. I'll do what I can. You'll see they always get avocado, even weeks later when we've only done it once. You can absolutely do this. I believe in all of you. And finally, credit to the fine people who created these beautiful PowerPoint templates. And I will see you all in class.